All right, so here we go. We're off to the next topic. So now we're going to discuss green algae and land plants. So the objectives for this chapter are to summarize important ecosystem services that plants provide. We're going to analyze research strategies for studying land plants and the relationships among the groups. Then we're going to compare and contrast the life cycle and key traits of green algae, non-vascular plants, seedless vascular plants, and then the seed vascular plants. And we're going to end it with describing some key features of the major groups of land plants. Okay. So green plants and algae, they belong to a clade known as Viridiplantae. Okay. So green algae and are important photosynthetic organisms, mainly for freshwater habitats, while plants are important photosynthetic organisms for terrestrial environments. So even though green algae have been traditionally considered protists, as you guys remember, protist is an unranked group, so it's an informal group. Okay. But we study uh, green algae along with land plants for two reasons. Number one, because they're the closest living relatives to green plants. Okay. And they also show a transition from aquatic to terrestrial life that occurred when land plants evolved from green algae. So land plants were the first organisms that could thrive with their tissues completely exposed to the air. So green algae, they need to be submerged in water in order to survive. Before land plants evolved, the terrestrial life was limited to bacteria, archaea, and other single-celled protists. And then when plants arrived, they transformed the nature of life on Earth. So why do biologists study green algae and land plants? Well, because they're absolutely required for humans to survive. Right? Humans rely on plants for a lot of things. So like food, fuel, uh, materials to make clothing, building materials, and also pharmaceuticals. So that's a lot of the drugs are made from plants. So biologists study plants in addition to studying beneficial plants. They also study plants that cause problems. So, for example, weeds that could that could cause damage to crops, or invasive species that do a lot of damage to natural areas. So, an ecosystem consists of all the organisms in a particular area, as well as the non-living components of an environment, okay? Like the atmosphere, the precipitation, sunlight, the nutrients in the land. So, so the ecosystem services provided by green algae and land plant include things like the oxygen, okay, because they produce oxygen via photosynthesis. They build and hold soil. Okay. So they build the soil by adding organic matter to the soil. So that serves as food for decomposers. So it could be things like earthworms or wood lice. And they also hold the soil and they prevent nutrients from being washed away, whether by wind or by water. And they can also hold water in the soil. So like swampy habitats are great at holding water in the soil. And they also moderate the local climate. Okay, so for example, they reduce the temperature underneath the trees. They can reduce the impact of wind on landscapes by making it so when you have a lot of wind in landscapes, that can make habitats a lot more drier and colder. But if you have trees there, that kind of reduces that. So plants provide benefits to all of these ecosystem services. Okay, here's an example of devegetation leading to soil erosion. So without a lot of plants, a lot of the nutrients in the soil get washed away with water. Okay? And it also makes it more difficult for the water to stay in place. So without a lot of plants to hold the water just washes through and it takes a lot of the nutrients with it. So land plants are dominant primary producers in terrestrial ecosystems. So this is another important thing that uh, an important function that they serve. So they serve as like the foundation of a lot of food webs because they're the primary producers. So they're the ones that are converting, sunlight into carbohydrates. And then you have the primary consumers that rely on them for food, and then the secondary consumers and tertiary consumers. Okay. So they also play a key role in the carbon cycle because they take in carbon dioxide from the atmosphere and they reduce it to make sugars. And they also fix more carbon dioxide than they release. So plants do release some carbon dioxide when they uh, when they're doing cellular respiration, but they're fixing more than they're releasing. So for instance, the loss of plant-rich prairies has contributed to an increase in concentrations of CO2 in the atmosphere. Or like the loss of a lot of rainforests also contributes to the increased concentrations of CO2 in the atmosphere. Okay. So when you have a lot of CO2 in the atmosphere, that's contributing to higher greenhouse gases accumulating, and a lot of heat gets trapped in. So now let's look at the food. So agriculture research began with initial domestication of crop plants. So this was done by using plants through artificial selection. So using the plants that have certain properties that humans thought were very beneficial to them. Okay, so for example, if you look at the wild species of, you can look at a lot of crops, but corn, if you look at the wild species, the corn that you know today doesn't look anything like the wild species. Or if you look at things like tomatoes, if you look at wild tomatoes, they don't look anything like the ones you buy at a grocery store. That's done because of artificial selection. Same thing with things like broccoli or what else? Broccoli, strawberries. Usually everything that's found in the wild, it's a lot smaller than what you see at the grocery store. And that's because those crops are selected for specific reasons. So whether it's to give a bigger fruit, a bigger grain, or yielding more grain. Okay. Then there's the fuel. So historically, humans rely on wood burning for energy, but in industrialized countries, they also use a lot of fossil fuels. So like coal, petroleum, and natural gas. Excuse me. So fossil fuels are derived from plants, living or that existed along like millions of years ago. So, for example, coal that's made when organic material accumulates like in swampy or bog areas, and if the oxygen concentration in that water is low, then the organic material decomposes slowly. And then if it gets uh, sediment, if it's covered by sediment, over time, the pressure of the sediment on top will will produce coal eventually. Okay, so we also rely on plants for some of the some of the raw materials that they provide. So that's some of the things that we use to make clothes, rope, household articles like towels, right? Also like, things we use for work or school like paper. And then there's the medicines. They provide about 25% of prescriptions written in the United States. And each year, one molecule is derived from plants. Oh, sorry. And in each year, it includes at least one molecule derived from plants. So most of these compounds are synthesized by plants to repel herbivores. Okay, so here's some of the drugs that are derived from land plants. Okay, so you might find some of these that look familiar. So like peppermint, papaya, the opium poppy. Okay. There's things like the let's see, wild yams, willow trees. Okay. So they provide a lot of they have a lot of uses, a wide range of uses. Okay, so we'll pause here and then we'll continue with the other section on the next video.